Have you ever stopped to think about what happens during the birthing process? All too often in society, we celebrate the arrival of a baby. We coo over tiny toes. But what about the mother? What about the mother and their partner? What about her and their experience? And what if that experience is vastly different depending on the color of her skin? What resources are available to mothers and their partners? And are therapists actively discussing and preparing mothers and their partners in the psychological impact of the birthing process? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Shanaz Ekone, a licensed professional counselor, speaker, consultant, entrepreneur, and a dedicated mother. She's a passionate advocate for increasing workplace and community wellness and is a recognized trauma expert, social justice advocate, and wellness strategist. Her work has been featured in prominent platforms like Parent.com, Voyage Dallas, Canvas Rebel, Christie's List, and the Asian Mental Health Collective. And adding to her impressive list of accolades, she was recently voted the Best in Small Biz Guide in 2024, in addition to Best in Birth Mental Health 2024. Shanaz is deeply committed to serving women, mothers, and young professionals and brings a wealth of experience in addressing trauma. Her therapeutic approaches include EMDR, CBT, person-centered therapy, and she's also a registered play therapist and a national board certified counselor. Her educational background includes a Master's of Science in Counseling from University of North Texas and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Texas at Dallas. As a South Asian therapist, Shanaz will be discussing maternal mental health for women of color and how therapists can play a role in their support. Shanaz, thank you so much for being on our episode today.
Yes, thank you, Jack, so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's amazing to see your contributions in your writings about maternity mental health.
Absolutely.
And can you share with us some of your observations, particularly when it comes to mothers of color?
Absolutely. As a therapist, I started working with children primarily, and that was my main focus, especially going to UNT and specializing in play therapy. But it wasn't until my own pregnancy that I started to learn more about birth discrepancies and internalized racism and implicit bias amongst the providers that were working with me. And that really took me back as a therapist, because as therapists, we always want to advocate for our clients and ourselves, but sometimes we are so taken back by these macro aggressions that we don't know what to do, and we kind of can freeze or go back to a place. And so really the work shifted for me back when I had my own son back in 2018 when I was giving birth. That experience alone changed the whole trajectory of my practice. I immediately started doing more research and talking to women of color. And it wasn't just my experience that was the alarming part. There were so many women of color that were experiencing the same things, but they didn't have the skills or the resources or even the tools to advocate for themselves. And so it was in that moment that I decided that I also wanted to transition and serve women, specifically women of color, around their birthing experience to help with birth equity. And, I'm originally from Dallas, but I live in Austin. So I gave birth in Austin. And during that time, my doctor and I had a rapport. We would go in for general meetings. And then it came to my attention that I should hire a doula. And so I thought, let me find a doula of color, somebody that, can work with me, somebody that can really help me advocate. Because as a first-time mom, there's only so many books you can read. And so this doula was a Black lady. And she worked through an organization called Mama Sana, and I'll give you more information about that as a resource guide. And she actually became my doula for free through this program. And she would go to me with questions and ideas. And during the last part of my trimester, she would actually come to my visit. And she said, hey, you know what, just give your doctor a heads up. I'm allowed to be a part of the birthing process and I want to meet your doctor. I'm like, great, there should be no problem. But as soon as I told my doctor that, she was on the defense. She thought that I was, looking through how she's treating me, and the whole appointment was so tense and eerie compared to our visits together. And my doula then processed that with me. She's like, "Hey, what did you notice? I know that she's talking to you like this and she's kind of forcing you to do this. And how are you feeling?" And the doula really slowed things down for me. And it brought to my attention that these little tiny things that I've noticed that felt off in my body, that, maybe this doctor isn't the best for me, but what can I do? I'm already about to have this baby. And so the doula and her, obviously worked together in that session, but it was brought to my attention that I had the opportunity to switch, but I just didn't have the capacity to do that. And so I encourage the listeners here, if you're having a client or if you're working with somebody and things feel off, that should be honored. And you can change your doctor at any point in your pregnancy. Okay. So it starts with just having the knowledge to empower yourself to pick what's best for you. And, because I didn't pick a new doctor from that point on, things began to get progressively worse. I went in for my last appointment, my last checkup before I was supposed to take off, for a week from work to rest. And I went into this appointment and I was stuck in traffic. I had a client that was actively suicidal. I had to do like an assessment with him as I was headed out. And then I had to find a way to return my keys. And then I found out in that process, nobody was going to cover my shift while I was gone for 3 months. And that was devastating. I worked at the time in community-based mental health. I was at a school and I had a very high acuity caseload. And so between all of that stress, of course, when you go to the doctor appointment, what do? They take your blood pressure, right?
Right.
They take your blood pressure, the vitals, and I'm like, "Hey, let's take the blood pressure at the end of appointment so I can like catch my breath." I didn't even eat that day because I was just like so ready to be done with work so I could have my appointment and then go home and relax. And they're like, "No, we have to take it now and it has to be this way." I'm like, "Well, in the past, I've always asked for, my blood pressure." And so that's another thing for listeners. You can advocate for when your blood pressure and vitals are taken. They can compare before, because obviously there's going to be some anxiety or stress to get to the appointment, dealing with traffic or whatever. And they can also take it at the end, right? To get a more accurate result. They completely refused. And so what happened is it was elevated. I was going through some stress and I talked to my doctor and she wouldn't listen. She said that I had to go immediately to the hospital, that I could just walk there, right? Because her practice was like literally across from the hospital I was going to give birth at. She's like, "Just go ahead and walk there and, go ahead and check yourself in and you can have this baby." And I'm like, first, I'm not experiencing any labor pains. I'm not in active labor. My husband doesn't even know what's happening. I also have a dog at home and I don't have my pregnancy bag. Like I thought this was like, a general checkup. Things are good, baby's heartbeat, all
Yeah,
the
there's no sign that you are about to go into labor, and this was suggested. This is odd. Yeah.
things. Mhm. And
Wow.
it was just so rushed in that process that my fear started to take over, right? And it didn't help that the doctor's like, "Well, your blood pressure's elevated. You could possibly die. If you die or the baby dies, that's not my fault." Like she really laid it on. And so at this point, I'm panicking. I'm trying to call my husband who works at a school. And if anybody's listening that works at a school or has a partner, it's really hard for them to be on their phone, right? But luckily enough, he picked up and I explained the situation. At this point, I'm overwhelmed. I'm crying. I'm trying to call my doula. My doula is trying to help me do some breathing exercises and check in. And it was just so much. And for it to be your first pregnancy, you don't know what's happening, right? You want to trust your provider. You want to trust your doctor that they have your best interest. But this wasn't my case.
Yeah, so this is what you mean by when you're talking about some of the microaggressions, like being rushed. My concerns aren't being heard and validated. Wow, wow. Thank you for bringing that up, and also unfortunate that you had to go through that type of experience. And I would imagine because of just how frightening and painful that whole ordeal was, that you don't want any other mothers to have to go through that.
Oh, and honestly, Jack, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So then my husband and I agree to go to the doctor because we don't want to refuse treatment or come across as a difficult patient. So we go and we wait for hours to get testing. They do a urine analysis, they do blood, they do all of this stuff. And at this point, it's so late in the day, they're like, yeah, you're just gonna have to stay and have this baby, you know? And the doctor came in and she's like, yeah, I'm going out of town. I'm going on vacation. So she's like, either you have this baby or not with me. And I'm like, at that point, I was like, bye, like, go have fun on your trip. I don't ever want to see you again. And I told her that, like, I never want to see you again because of how she treated me. And so she gave me all of this information. It's all fear-based. There was no, information around education or consent around what my options were. So they had to induce me. And for anybody that's listening, to be induced and to not be in active labor is a very painful process. They give you Pitocin, which is like a synthetic oxytocin that your body produces when you're naturally in labor. And so they sped up the whole process by a week. I had to call my neighbor to like watch my dog. I had my bag and my husband were with me, but then they refused to let me eat anything because they said that, if the baby's coming. And so also to advocate for yourself, if you're a listener, you do have the right to eat something if you'd like. Sometimes they might, prevent you from doing that. But before they give you the Pitocin, you can something or have something to drink. And my husband advocated for me. So he was able to run. And I remember he got me this amazing Halal Brothers dish. I still remember the yellow rice and the falafel. Like that's a core memory of like, he took care of me. I was able to eat. But then they started inducing me at like 4 a.m. through that process. And that was a whole nother thing that happened that I didn't want.
Now, may I just maybe put a pause here because now, fortunately, a lot of our listeners are therapists.
Mm-hmm.
At the same token, part of our goal here is to talk about how therapists can support this birthing process. And my radars are just going off right now. Alarm system of, wait a second, what happens if people who have had prior trauma experience? What's the meaning of this in terms of power and control? These are themes that are just coming up. Oh my gosh.
And that's what was the main theme, was that my power was taken away. I felt powerless because once you're induced, I had the blood pressure cuff that was going off. Like it felt like every 2 minutes, just like contracting. I was plugged into all of these cords. Now at this point, I couldn't get out of bed if I wanted to go to the bathroom. I ran out of water. I had to call somebody. I was very much chained to this bed, which was very much not part of the birth plan. For anybody that knows, like when you meet with your therapist or doula, like you have a birth plan, you have an idea of what you want. It all went out the window. And so there's also this grief process that I didn't have time to process because I'm like, am I going to die? Is something going to happen to my baby? So I was very much in this mindset that something could happen. And now I don't know who I can trust.
God.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have been furious. I mean, there's resentment, right?
Yeah.
Gosh.
It was a lot. Mm-hmm.
It is a lot. And so when we have clients who are coming into our office, many of them are going to be mothers.
Yes.
And it does bring to attention just how, it's such a disservice if we don't even bring up the birthing process. Like, I'm speaking as a male, there's oftentimes this privilege of, congratulations, good luck, sort of the social things that we say just to say good luck, but we don't go beyond that in therapy sessions. So you actually talk about, even in your writing and your advocacy work, some important work that we therapists need to consider. So tell us about those things.
Yeah, I think it's so important as you serve your clients, especially if they're diverse clients, to really listen from their aspect, because if you identify as somebody that's not a person of color, your aspect of treatment might vary completely differently, right? Like I'll even share like past that, like my pain meds and everything at my aftercare were like denied because I was a person of color. And so really as a therapist, when you're working with clients, you really want to unpack the emotional labor of navigating a predominantly white space or how to advocate for yourself. And so we talked about this earlier, is like asking them questions, asking them what their plan is, asking them what they want. And then also from a trauma informed lens, it's like, what will happen if that doesn't happen, right? Like, how can we keep you safe in this moment? So oftentimes it's like you're gearing up somebody with like mindfulness and self compassion and advocacy, but that's also through like role playing and asking them to practice, asking them what it is that they need. And if they can have a doula or support partner or somebody there to help them navigate that, because it can be a lot if you're just alone in this. And a lot of women might be.
So you are literally practicing conversations.
Hmm.
Like, hey, if you're meeting with a doctor, what are you actually telling them?
Yeah, I'll actually ask them, like, what are their initial thoughts and what is coming up in their body? Do they feel like the person is listening to them? Are they being rushed? Asking questions like, I want to make sure I fully understand like my condition or what's going on. Can you explain to it in terms? And I'll have them write out questions that they want to ask their doctor, because sometimes bedside manner doesn't exist. And that's unfortunate. They can be seen as like a quick number in and out. So I have my clients write down all of their concerns on paper or anything that they want more answers to, and then they ask them. And then asking them to role play with me to practice that, to build the confidence that they can advocate and say no, or they can say, I want to try this. Or, in the birthing process, you have so many options, but sometimes it's very limited because the doctor really wants you to be in and out, because they sometimes even schedule, right, what rooms are available. And I'm noticing that with my clients, especially North, there's hospitals that are saying we don't have space right now. So we have to either schedule it, or they'll try to push for a C-section when your body can actually have a baby, through other means. And so it's just understanding, asking questions. How is this medication affecting me? I've experienced this symptom or this pain. It's been dismissed before. Can you notate why, or tell me why you're not providing treatment, right?
Oh,
You
wow,
can
you're explicit that in saying
Mhm.
this has been dismissed before.
Right. And you can
Okay.
even ask them, I would like you to chart that you are dismissing me right now, right?
Oh,
I'd like for you to chart or notate or document why you are not sharing this resource with me, right? Because
oh,
now it's
wow.
like,
This is
oh,
this is new to me as I'm listening to this. Wow,
yeah,
it's interesting.
you can let them know. And then if you don't like it, you can report it, or you can talk to the office manager and see if you can switch to a different provider, a different hospital, a different person. Because if you allow a lot of these things to get pushed under or just to be swept away, the body needs to be relaxed during delivery, right? If we're giving birth with fear, anxiety, and stress, that's going to overwhelm and sometimes delay the process. And I hate to say that, but that's why it's so important to find a therapist that understands maternal mental health, that can help the client navigate breathing practices, mindfulness, somatic experiencing, things like that, because sometimes we hold it internally in our body for years after, right? Like after I gave birth, the pregnancy itself was traumatic. When I worked with, pelvic floor therapists and like specialists with body work, I held it all on my left side of my body. And I had to release that through like fascia release and exercises and like talking to somebody. That all helped. And so as a therapist, also knowing resources, connecting them with like lactation consultants, pelvic floor, physical therapy, OT. There's so many things within the birthing community that everybody wants to work together, then it's important for that therapist to have those referrals and connections to help them ease in that process should they need that.
Hmm. The other thing that I am picking up on that you mentioned early on too is, which
Mhm.
probably applies to a lot of women of color, which
Yes.
is I don't want to speak up and be the loud. I want to be the good patient.
Yes.
Gosh.
Absolutely, because I had a really great doula in the birthing process, and also the nursing staff were wonderful. They were accommodating. It was after I gave birth that it was just like this domino effect of like dismissal. Like after I gave birth, I was denied my pain meds. They wouldn't give me Tylenol. I have no history of drug or substance use addiction. They refused my Tylenol. After I gave birth, like, and I say this to be transparent, like if you give birth in a hospital, they're supposed to give you like pads, the little mesh underwear, like cold packs, creams, all types of like witch hazel stuff. And my postpartum nurse was like, you need to take your mesh underwear and wash it in the sink, right? And she told me that. And I was taken back because obviously I gave birth, everything has been bled through. And I say that because people are shocked when they hear this happened in 2019. Like, this wasn't like you know, a long time ago. This is at a very famous, prestigious hospital, so to speak, in Austin. And the way that they treated me, they denied me my pain meds, they denied me my basic supplies. So when it came time for my second pregnancy, I was like on my neighborhood page, like looking for postpartum supplies and mesh stuff. And one person commented, like, don't you know you can get this at a hospital? I'm like, well, that wasn't my experience. So now for my second pregnancy, you see how that impacts, like, oh, I'm trying to collect supplies and save and like get things that I would need that a hospital is supposed to provide for me.
Yeah, because you're not going to trust that. I mean, based on your first experience, you don't trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so one experience can then shape future experiences. So even understanding when you're working with clients that have one child or twins or multiple children or family planning, to really unpack and process that, because you don't want them to carry that into their next experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just a lot of heaviness, right? To go
Yeah.
through this. And you want, we talk about oftentimes this glorious motherhood experience. and
Yeah.
then, but the reality is, it doesn't go that way
No.
quite often. Especially, we actually did an episode on Black and birthing, and
Yes.
I think this. You've written about the death of Black women that
Yes.
goes through the birthing process, and it's just very unfortunate.
Mhm.
Uh,
And
yeah,
a lot of it can be prevented, right? So there's still a lot of awareness and education that needs to be done in hospitals and birthing support systems, right? There's implicit bias, I am married to a Black man. And so that changes how he was treated. It changes how we were given information or not given information. So if you're a therapist working with a person of color, or if they're in a biracial relationship, to really support and give them the tools and to really validate their experience, even if it isn't something you've experienced.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that, because I think another piece that is also missing in a conversation is the partner.
Hmm.
In terms of their racial
Exactly.
demographics, it's like, oh gosh, my partner. I just assume that my partner is of the same race.
Right. And
Where,
a lot of people
yeah,
assume that when they see me, and then they're like, oh, we didn't know. It's like, I didn't think I had to tell you,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Why would it matter like that?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, Shanaz, so you've talked about this. It's a traumatic experience. It was a traumatic birthing
It
experience. So,
was.
and thinking about your, I would say, career experience,
Mhm.
what were some of the challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is like processing it, right? Allowing your body to heal and talking about it so that it doesn't just store up in your body. I'm very much into somatic experiencing. So, like, the experiences can be held deeply within our body. So, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to see a therapist. It's okay to, work with somebody that can help you navigate that. There's no shame in that. And I know specifically within like Asian cultures, there's certain rules and things about talking to therapists, but I encourage everybody that you need somebody before, during, and after, because your whole mind and body will go through this huge transformation period, and it's okay to seek help. It's okay
Mhm.
to ask for help.
Yeah. And for you, what does it mean to be a South Asian therapist?
Yeah, it means to really shed light on what goes on within our culture, our family systems, and how that shapes how we think, feel, and behave and interact with the world. As a South Asian therapist, I grew up in my own family system of trauma, and I understand the isms and how that can prevent people from getting the access to care they need. And so, part of being a South Asian therapist is to make it accessible and to really honor their culture and traditions in the work that we do, to make sure that they're aligning in their treatment as well as in their culture.
So for you, you're saying that you're also carrying out some of your family and generational cultural values by you
It's
living it, by you also providing therapy.
Yes, and I love working with South Asian communities because there's often a barrier, shame, or stigma to getting that help. And I'm here to normalize and to validate that you deserve the care. And there's, therapists that look like you out there that can help you navigate that, no matter what it is.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts or tips for therapists who, and honestly, it's just incredible to have this conversation because most people separate out
Mhm.
birthing from therapy. And just by having
Yeah.
this conversation is also making me rethink, this
Hmm.
is the entire human experience. Why shouldn't it be
Yeah.
discussed and processed in therapy?
Hmm. I would encourage that therapists that are working specifically with, perinatal and postpartum clients, whether they're male or female, to really understand what that means, right? To have, understanding of knowledge of like counseling theories and behaviors and stuff. It's very much different to understand like what postpartum depression is, right? Postpartum anxiety. So really understanding what those symptoms look like, understanding how they vary between men and women, and also like cultural norms and, gender norms as well, right? Men often will hold it in, or they'll pull back, or they may not be, so open about what they're experiencing. It's more of an internalized thing. Women that go through it, their hormones are changing as well. They might be more external in how they show that. That's why, the doctors that come back in 6 weeks, you do like a little Edinburgh exam or like a little questionnaire, and they send you on your way for a whole year. That doesn't make any sense, because within that 6 months, you're still postpartum. And postpartum depression, anxiety can last up to 2 or 3 years if left untreated. So who's there to catch them when they fall, right? So that's why a therapist should be really understanding of what the postpartum depression looks like, postpartum anxiety. Also within like postpartum families is postpartum rage, when their needs are not being met, when they are overwhelmed, when they're tired. Sometimes having a child can re-trigger their own childhood trauma, right? So as a therapist, being aware of your trauma history of the client and understanding, how they're showing up in each session and how you can support them and what you've noticed is changing and what resources they might need, because you're really walking through with them in this journey. And the identity shift, right, between kind of a mom and a dad is so different.
And you're also conveying that your client, yes, is the client that's in your office. You're also
Mhm.
addressing the support system, and you're also talking about postpartum anxiety and depression also with the partner. And, postpartum anxiety isn't even in the DSM, which is so unfortunate, because I've seen clients coming in
Mhm.
with postpartum anxiety, but yet it's not in the
Yeah.
DSM. Yeah.
And your doctor will be like, here, take a Zoloft or take some Ativan and we'll adjust it. But then it's like, it's not adjusting really anything else about sleep deprivation, right? Sleep deprivation can cause you to hear phantom cries. So even normalizing like, hey, sometimes you're going to be really tired and hearing your baby cry and they're not crying. Doesn't mean you're having hallucinations. It doesn't mean that you're in active psychosis. This is just sleep deprivation. And it hits really hard at week 3. So really understanding what men and women go through, right? Men's testosterone drops significantly postpartum, right? So it's like walking through if you have a male client that's supporting their partner, right?
Wow. Wow. So let's see. So Shanaz, anything else you can think of? Any other final thoughts about this
Yeah,
birthing process for women of color that you want therapists to also either learn or apply in their clinical work?
I would say becoming an ally and being curious, right? So being an ally to help them advocate for resources. There's so many programs and things within cities that offer either free doulas, midwives. I know in Austin, there's an organization called GALS. It's Giving Austin Labor Support, where somebody will come and help you have that birthing experience so you have to birth alone. So there's different organizations and resources. I can send you a link, and then if listeners want to sign up, I can send them some resources and tools just so they can have it in their tool belt on how to advocate, what they need, and how to give that to them in real time.
Fantastic. We'll definitely include that.
Yes.
And lastly, how do we support you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just listening is a huge help. I'm going to send out a link to you, Jack. And if you guys want to fill it out, I can send more information. I'm really big on education because knowledge is power. And I really want people to be informed so they can have the best birth outcome and reduce, birth trauma or things like that. And, social media, I'm on there as well. So if you want to support me that way. And also, I'm going to be having an ebook that has a lot of resources on guides and information. So if you give me your email, I can send you that and I can give the listeners a discount. It's a 50 page guide that has resources for both therapists and birth workers, community members, as well as those that are birthing. And it walks you through all of the symptoms of postpartum depression, anxiety, differences of baby blues, coping strategies, breathing exercise. So these are things that you could utilize if you don't have access to therapy or if you just need something to navigate with your therapist. It's designed for both.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a workbook that you can also bring into session and have.
Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic.
And it's also divided for women and men as well, because I want to make sure it's
Oh,
inclusive for
oh,
both
wow.
experiences. So it's going to have things for men and women and whoever else that can join in and really learn something and share it. And I'm going to, I'll give your listeners a discount as well. How about that?
All right. Well, Shanaz, thank you so much for just the incredible conversation. And hopefully our listeners really picked up quite a bit. I know I learned a lot today in our conversation.
Absolutely. Yes. I'd love to come back if there's anything I can do, or if they have questions or anything I can do to support that. I feel like it's an ongoing conversation that needs to be had. And I really appreciate you allowing me to come on your platform to talk.
All right. You take care.
Thank you. Bye, Jack.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.